Okay, let's start with a tough question. How does America's absolute highest law enforcement institution, the Department of Justice, get vanquished by politics and fear?
It's a powerful question. And we're not just summarizing events today. We're really trying to look at the mechanism behind it all, how fear was used, how it paralyzed justice.
Right. And that's why today we're doing something a bit different, an extended analysis. Think of it as a bold new take on book coverage.
Yeah, it's more than just your typical summary, though we'll definitely cover the key points too.
We want to dig into how the authors actually shape their argument, how they build influence, and crucially, how they earn or maybe lose your trust as a reader.
The idea is to give you, the listener, tools to read with sharper insight, maybe even greater discernment.
Exactly. So, should you read this book? This deep dive should help you figure that out. And hey, it's probably pretty useful for aspiring writers too, seeing how persuasive nonfiction gets built.
We'd love to hear if you find this format valuable, by the way. Your feedback really helps us shape future content.
Okay, so the book we're diving into is Injustice: How Politics and Fear Vanquished America's Justice Department. The authors are Carol Leonnig and Aaron C. Davis.
And it's worth mentioning as we get started that what you're hearing is a unique two-host AI conversation.
That's right, powered by Google's NotebookLM. It allows us to get deeper, more dynamic analysis by synthesizing these complex materials together.
Pretty cool tech for this kind of deep dive.
So back to the book. Trust is huge here. We need to talk about the authors, Leonnig and Davis. These aren't just commentators, right?
No, absolutely not. They're Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative reporters. That background is, well, it's central to the book's credibility, its persuasive power.
Why them specifically? What makes their perspective so compelling on this topic?
Well, it comes down to their track record. Deep sourcing, editorial independence, that's expected. But crucially, it's their access.
Access to what?
To exclusive DOJ materials, internal documents, and maybe most importantly, getting candid conversations with people inside the department, current and former personnel.
Ah, so they're pulling back the curtain, getting past the usual political spin.
Precisely. They're bringing firsthand, often insider observations into a story that's usually clouded by partisan noise. That's where their ethos really comes from.
That context is vital then, because the core subject here isn't just like a list of scandals or controversies.
No, it's deeper. It's about how the fundamental mission of the DOJ got twisted, subverted by partisanship, propaganda, and direct interference from the executive branch.
It's really a story about the erosion of the rule of law itself.
Exactly. And this is an ancient history. The book came out in 2025, and it's looking back at roughly a decade of this intense politicization.
Covering both the Trump and the Biden administrations, importantly.
Yes, it spans both. And the audience they seem to be writing for, well, it's politically engaged, citizens, policymakers, anyone really concerned about the health of our democratic institutions.
You can feel the urgency in the writing, the exigence, as we'd say. Why this book? Why now?
It speaks directly to that decline in public trust. And specifically, it connects to the ongoing fallout from the January 6th Capitol riot. That event looms large.
So the authors aren't just passive observers here. Their purpose feels much stronger.
Oh, definitely. Their purpose is clearly to inform, yes, but also to warn. There's a real sense of alarm.
How do they manage that tone? It could easily become just angry.
They strike a careful balance. It's sober alarm mixed with relentless, almost dispassionate documentation. You sense their frustration, their disappointment, but the focus stays on the institution.
So the goal is exposing how these norms got corrupted.
And inspiring some kind of vigilance, pushing for the Justice Department's restoration. They're showing how political pressure and, importantly, internal fear ultimately undermine the DOJ's mandate.
Okay, let's get into the real substance of their analysis, because the structure of their argument is fascinating.
It really is. The central claim, if you boil it down, is that this is a, quote, jaw-dropping account of political partisans and enablers wrecking democracy.
Strong words. But they also highlight people inside trying to resist.
Yes, that's crucial. They contrast the wreckers with the internal DOJ officials who were genuinely struggling, often failing, to maintain neutrality and uphold the rule of law.
And rhetorically, how do they make that case?
They use irony very powerfully. It's a constant contrast between the DOJ's stated mission, like, equal justice under law, and the reality of its behavior when squeezed politically.
And the core of that structure, you mentioned this earlier, is this idea of a pendulum swing.
Exactly. That's the key structural device. They argue the failure wasn't just one thing, but this destructive swing between two extremes.
Okay, let's unpack that swing. What's the first side?
On one side, you have the Trump administration. The book details aggressive, overt politicization, direct interference. The aim, as they portray it, was bending the DOJ to the president's will, maybe even punishing political enemies.
And how do they show that? What kind of evidence makes that convincing?
They use internal communications, emails, memos, combined with extensive interviews. These reveal what they claim is direct, often inappropriate, pressure from political appointees. Pressure to investigate certain people or maybe not investigate others.
Allies, for instance.
Right. And they back this up with documented testimony from career staff, people who felt they had to resign or were pushed aside for sticking to established procedures and norms.
So the argument is that fear, institutional fear, was wielded almost like a weapon to ensure compliance during that period.
That's the picture they paint, yes. Fear of retribution, fear of being sidelined.
Okay, but then the book pivots. The pendulum swings. What happens during the Biden term, according to their analysis?
This is where the irony really lands. They argued the DOJ became almost paralyzed by the opposite extreme, a profound fear of appearing political in any way.
Attorney General Garland's approach, they term it excess caution.
Yes, leading to what they describe as an intense, risk-averse stasis, a reluctance to move decisively, especially on politically sensitive cases.
So the overcorrection becomes its own problem.
That's the core argument. The extreme reluctance to act, driven by the fear of appearing partisan, was in its own way just as damaging to the DOJ's credibility and function.
How so? Damaging in what way?
Well, they argue it led to delays, a paralysis that meant accountability wasn't happening in a timely way. This allowed perceptions of immunity or impunity to grow.
Wait, hang on. Are they really arguing that being too cautious, acting too slowly, is fundamentally as damaging to the rule of law as aggressive partisan interference? That feels like a really stark comparison.
It's a very strong claim and a difficult one to weigh. But they use repetition, rhetorically, to hammer it home.
How does that work?
They keep showing examples, instance after instance, where they argue this institutional fear of backlash, fear of appearing biased, caused this paralysis and overcorrection.
So 2 different failures, same outcome.
Essentially, yes. They argue it undermined the institution's effectiveness in 2 completely different ways. One was active interference, the other was passive paralysis. But both, they conclude, resulted in a failure of justice being fully served. It's a provocative thesis.
It certainly is. Okay, before we dig deeper into how they build that case with evidence, let's take a quick moment. If you're finding this analysis useful, check out the Mindful Moments YouTube channel.
Right. It offers more AI-powered book analysis, summaries, critiques, really good stuff for inspiring reflection and rational thought. Definitely worth a look.
So back to building influence. How do Leonnig and Davis earn the reader's trust on such contentious points?
Primarily through the sheer weight of their evidence. That's the logos appeal, right? The narrative is just packed with supporting details.
Like what specifically?
Extensive interviews, citing official documents, laying out detailed timelines, using direct quotes from insiders. This rigorous sourcing underpins their conclusions, especially on why certain decisions were made or not made in both administrations.
And they have to make complex legal and bureaucratic stuff understandable.
Yes, and they manage that well. The language is clear, it's precise, it carries institutional weight, moving between straightforward reporting and pretty sharp analysis of procedural constraints and political pressures.
But it's not just a dry academic report, is it? There's an emotional dimension, too.
Absolutely crucial. They know they need more than just data. They weave in personal vignettes very effectively. That's the pathos.
Using emotion not just to, stir things up, but to show the real-world impact.
Exactly. To demonstrate the human cost of these institutional failures. You feel the frustration, the fear, sometimes the disappointment.
And those personal stories are key, I imagine.
Oh, yes. They highlight these stubbornly brave career people agents, prosecutors who genuinely tried to uphold justice but were blocked, either by direct political interference or later by that institutional paralysis we talked about.
So it's that blend. The documented turmoil inside the DOJ, the hard data, plus the emotional weight of those individual struggles.
That combination is powerful. It moves the reader from just being interested to having a deep, foundational concern about what's happening to American governance. You see, step by step, how norms break down when politics overrides process.
It sounds like it really hits the mark for a certain kind of reader. someone already engaged with politics and governance.
Definitely. The mix of that newsy, high-stakes drama with the necessary procedural detail works very well for politically literate readers, people who kind of understand the basics of how the DOJ is supposed to function.
But maybe not for everyone.
Well, the authors themselves, or rather the analysis of the book, acknowledges that. For some general readers, the sheer depth of the institutional analysis, the complexity, it could be intellectually demanding.
It's not beach reading then.
No, definitely not. It requires focus. You need to pay attention to the timeline, the nuances of legal procedure, to really grasp the full scale of the failures they're documenting.
Okay, so let's try to assess the overall achievement. What does the book accomplish?
I think it's a really carefully constructed argument. It moves very effectively from specific scandals, things people might remember from the news, to a much broader systemic diagnosis of the institution itself.
And its main contribution is
Bringing to light just how deeply norms were undermined, and crucially, detailing the potential long-term consequences of that erosion for justice and for democracy itself.
So connecting back to the listener, what's the real relevance here? This so what?
The book serves as a powerful cautionary tale, really, for any democratic institution anywhere. That synthesis of personal stories and deep institutional analysis shows exactly how politics and fear can corrode even seemingly solid norms.
It forces you to look past the daily headlines.
Yes, it pushes readers to consider the systemic risks, how fragile these things can be when political interests clash with institutional independence. It definitely advances the public discourse on that front.
Which leaves us with a pretty challenging final thought, something for you, our listeners, to consider after this deep dive. If a book like this can meticulously document institutional paralysis, a failure of the system to correct itself, what does that imply? What specific actions, maybe outside of government, might citizens need to take to restore trust and independence when politics just leads to inertia?
That's a heavy question. What happens when the checks and balances themselves seem compromised by fear or politics?
Exactly. Something to really mull over.
Indeed.
Well, thank you for joining us for this extended analysis of injustice. If you want the in-depth book summary, click the link you see on screen.
And please subscribe, share this with others who might find it interesting, and you can purchase the book via the link too.
And above all, keep thinking rationally, especially about the future of democracy.
And don't forget to check out the many other genre-based book explorations at Mindful Moments. Subscribe and nourish your mind on the go.